Summer air orders vagrant parts, dust and melancholy.
Hello, this is Hilary Robertson. Welcome to this latest episode of Harmonious World. And I'm delighted to be joined this time by Lara Solnicki, Canadian composer, singer and poet. She has a new cinematic vocal project out now. It's called The One and the Other. It's described as a collection of tone poems. There is certainly something cinematic and poetic about this collection. So the music and the poetry and all the texts are written by Lara herself. Jonathan Goldsmith produces and performs on keyboards and electric bass and electric guitar. Lara is undoubtedly a world-class jazz singer, but she's so much more than that. And I am really looking forward to this conversation. Lara is actually a classically trained singer and originally intended to go into opera. She has something immensely creative, especially in this new album. Jonathan Goldsmith described these tracks as each song is a miniature movie. And I think that conjures something that of the cinematic quality of each song. Well, I hope you enjoy listening to our conversation. Welcome to Harmonious World.
Thank you.
So the whole point of my podcast is it's based on a quote from Quincy Jones about what a harmonious world it would be if we all share what we're good at.
Yeah, right.
So that's where I'm coming from. Your latest album, very, very interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what it is, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something to be proud of. The One and the Other.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting because I've been rereading the story Jekyll and Hyde.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which,
great.
You know, it's all about good and evil. And it strikes me that everything about this album is about opposites and balances. Yes. And, you know, is that where you were coming from?
Yeah, exactly. So it kind of the original idea behind the record. I was actually in a relationship with someone at a point, and we were talking about Martin Buber, you know, I and thou. And it, you know, without sort of, I just kind of took it in as my own, I guess you might say. And that relationship ended up feeling like a period where we were so close. We were kind of, you know, the collapse of ego boundaries, and we were basically a unit. I mean, you know, looking back, it's always a bit different. But and then, you know, and then there was a sense of feeling very separate from that person when it all ended, and like, do I even really know this person? And there was a sense of like, did I really experience what I experienced? Did they experience what they experienced? You know, what are we both going to take away from this? So it was a weird experience because I'd never experienced anything that felt so, you know, like falling in love in such an intense way, basically. So, you know, there was a lot of poetry that came out of that experience, and the feeling of being sort of severed from another person. It felt like a very cold, abrupt thing, and it created a lot of existential questioning in my mind about, you know, even just the nature of experience, and, you know, the sense of like, do we experience what we think we're experiencing with someone else? Do we ever really know? And memory on its own too is a complicated thing, because what we remember is not necessarily how things were, and then how we experience things are not necessarily how they were, and then what is anything in this life except for subjective experience. So that's what basically prompted this record. So I had a lot of poetry that I'd written. And so when I decided, you know, that I wanted to put my poetry at the center of my music for the first time, because they'd always been pretty separate. You know, I had my interests in writing. I was really into Sylvia Plath, and then, you know, a lot of Baudelaire, who I was also came in through the Debussy singing that I did in my undergrad and all that. So there was a mix going on in my life between poetry and music, but not really. Not in jazz. Let's just say that, jazz is not really, the songs are not based on poems in the same way as classical music, where the composers would take these set poems. Sometimes they would actually not take the most famous poem, if you look at Strauss or something, but they would take a poem that they felt could maybe benefit by music, whereas some poetry was sort of already perfect. Why would you touch it? Right.
Right.
So I decided, like, okay, so music and poetry, like taking this poetry that is already about the sense of unity and, severing that and all that stuff. And there's already a tension going on. There's a polarity here. And then this is actually what I'm working on, even in music, is the notion of like, how can I keep the intention of the poem and my poems, not somebody else's poems, but the type of poetry that I like that tends to be very dense. And the people that I read that tend to be these sort of little small minimalist sculptures that mean a lot. So that was really what provoked the record. And then I didn't want to write too many lyrics. So I did some adapting of the poems for sure. And for sure, when I look back, like I could definitely open up my notebook and see, why didn't I take this line? Why did this line get this? So there is stuff that happens to accommodate music, but I didn't want to do too much of that. So that's how this album emerged. So there's a lot of tension going on, and the one and the other. That's exactly what it is. So it's the oneness, the otherness of that individual, right?
Yeah.
The oneness and the otherness of the poem and music. Sometimes they seem to work well together. Sometimes they seem to be at odds with each other. And then I used those ideas to create composition techniques to inspire the writing of the music too. So it was a pretty fun process.
I can imagine. I heard somebody, and I can't remember who it was, recently talking about the word jazz and the sort of the constraints that one puts on music as soon as you try and put it in a genre. Where do you put this? It's sort of, I mean, obviously there's a lot of jazz there. There's a lot of improvising. There's a lot of creativity, but it's not only jazz.
It's interesting because, there's like, the way I see it is there's actually quite a bit of audience potential with this record in a weird way, because there are people in, jazz fans that will really like it, avant-garde jazz and free improvisation and stuff. There are people in poetry that are very interested in it. People in classical music, they also get it in a certain sense because in some ways it's more in line with the philosophy of classical music. It's art song. It's basically an album of art songs. So it's in some ways it's closer to classical music, although then it doesn't sound like classical music really,
Yeah.
So you're completely right. It's hard to put it in a category, and then because there's electronics in some of the songs too, that already alienates it from jazz and purists who want to capture things in the moment. They think maybe it's too produced. There's overlap, and then there are things that are kind of potentially in conflict for listeners.
Yeah, and I looked at your video on YouTube that's sort of kind of explaining where this all came from, and you said there's something about come to it with an open mind.
I like the idea of just focusing on being myself and the best version of myself that I can be. It's a really challenging profession, being a musician, and then being a singer has challenges on top of that. And, we don't have to get into them. And then, there's a lot of administration in this career. It's a huge amount of admin. And, just dealing with the music business, which is kind of erratic, and unfortunately there's an unpredictability in this industry that we all know. So the question is, how do you make it work for you? So at a certain point, I think the beauty of this profession, like I wanted to be an opera singer. I was in university to do that. And I felt a lot of stress in that environment. The whole auditioning and the sort of being somebody else, having to, like a cattle call for sopranos, sit life, that kind of thing, where it's, I found it a little, challenging. So then moving into jazz, it's not like you're completely free to do whatever you want. As you say yourself, there are a lot of strict things around jazz. Does something swing? Does improvisation have a jazz vocabulary to it? There's lots of stuff, around jazz. And a lot of people are going through the universities now, of course, as you know. So people are getting taught to listen to the same thing and to sort of emulate certain things. And people are developing tastes at the same time as they're developing their technique. So I'm coming from this from another point. I've studied a lot of jazz now. I've worked with a lot of people on my jazz improvising and my jazz singing independently. I've sought out the people that I want to work with. So I didn't have like a load of stuff coming on me, I did in classical music, of course, classical music history and all the everything theory, blah, blah, blah. But so, like in some ways, I don't have all that baggage. I'm just being myself, and I'm bringing the things that interest me, which in my training, which is classical music, and then poetry, which is something not related to my musical training, and then jazz, and then I put it all together. And I guess this is, where it goes, basically.
Yeah. It feels very collaborative with Jonathan Goldsmith. That's very interesting. Is this the first time you've worked with him?
Yeah, it is. But, we had certain things in common that were interesting. I was introduced to him by Rob Pilch, who's the guitarist on the record, who I'd known for, 10 years or so. We did a lot of jazz gigs just here and there, like did a New Year's gig once. And so we did like the duo jazz straight ahead thing, basically. But, they'd work together in a lot of different environments. They did session work together. They have a band together. And, they work on lots of different projects together. So, but Jonathan also, so I sent these songs to Rob and they were interesting. I sent him a demo I'd made of the 3-part cycle. I changed the second one a lot since I sent him the demo, and it was like interesting. And Rob, who's done so many different styles of music, and he's amazing in all of them, he was like, wow, okay, this is interesting. And so he kind of introduced me to Jonathan, who happened to work in film. So then there was a coincidence there where he'd actually written the music for 2 of my father's films, but that we found that out later. Wow. So there are some kind of unconscious workings happening. Just the fact that he works with narrative and film, and he writes music for narratives and this and that, and he's allowed to be creative and do whatever he wants, I guess. I mean, I'm sure they give him, depends on the project, but so then I sort of, in some ways, my work was already kind of a little bit, had these narratives going on because also of my poetry and growing up around film production, and my mom's a poet and English teacher. So I kind of was just being myself and focusing on the things that interest me and, all the things that I think about that have nothing to do with music. And then he's used to bringing in these elements through film too. So I think that's what you're picking up on is these non-musical sensibilities that show up in this album.
Because It does feel very cinematic.
Yeah, there's something visual about this record. It's really visual. And I think that the reason that is the poetry that I write and that interests me is very image-based. So I do kind of see things. For some reason, I'm quite a visual person, even though in music, music and poetry are not by definition, visual arts or something. But the type of poetry that I like tends to be very visual, based on images. So that's, I think, and then it's not terribly linear because it's, based on a lot of 20th century aesthetics and 21st, I guess now. So it's not like romantic poetry or something, because the people that I also am interested in rebelled against that, like T.S. Eliot and all these people. Romantic poetry and the lyric phrase is kind of, it's not dead, but it's kind of dead at the same time, if you know what I mean. So I'm not going to write this lyrical poetry about birds and bees and flowers and all that people made a strong revolt against. I mean, what's the point of that? It's not really relevant. That's my feeling about it. So that could be also what you're sensing is these imaginative leaps, like we call them, that comes in away from the surrealists in poetry, like André Breton and some of these guys that were trying to, it's a bit like improvised music. They were trying to chart the thought process, the imaginative process. So obviously I'm not, writing poetry on the spot. I don't know if anyone can ultimately even do that. Like improvised poetry is to a point, I suppose, but I do try to stay open to ideas that are non-linear. So there's a relationship with that type of French poetry, and I think you might be picking that up with the French film thing, kind of in a direct way, like it's a second cousin, maybe,
Yeah. And of course, you're Canadian, so you're kind of, you've got that link to the French language. But also it's interesting that you've referenced T.S. Eliot, Sylvia Plath, some of our, English poets who are very difficult to define where they sit, and that's the excitement of their poetry, that they're not it's not Wordsworth and Coleridge that you can just put into that romantic box. Talk to me about the one and the other, the 3-part song cycle.
Well, this was kind of the main focus when I started writing this music. So that was kind of the center in a way. And so for some reason, the first thing that happened was like the art pop chorus that happens at the end of Past the Glass and Awe of the Sea. So in a way, it's funny because it's like it's stuck on like a tag or something, like a coda. But it was the center of the whole thing when I wrote it. It started with that. So that's something to kind of remember. This is something rhapsodic, like sort of like a rhapsody about it. And from there, it unravels backwards. I think the writing of it kind of, in a way, it unraveled backwards. So I created the art pop chorus. Obviously, I wanted to change it up a bit between the first and the second tune. But the message is kind of the theme, where you have the sense of, in the lyrics there, or those are actually lyrics. I would not call them poetry, because that's what I wanted. I wanted to have something that was like very, in those pieces, the first two anyway, I wanted it to be really based on the poetry, and then to end for some reason where usually we go from somewhere light to somewhere deeper in a narrative. You go more deeply into a story. For some reason, I wanted to explore the different layers and to play with them, because that's something unexpected too. So it goes from being more deep into the story to kind of ending up on a light level, in terms of the poetry being lyrics, or the sense of there's a predictability to the chorus. It's like a art pop chorus. So by doing that, by moving from something more deep to something more light at the end, it creates a message that maybe the story, there's an irony, maybe it's not as important as I thought. Maybe the love affair wasn't that important in the end. And that it's also because there's a lot of repetitive images. So the sense of the, it's like from the symbolist movement or the decadent movement, where you have the repetition of images that become your own metaphors, basically. So they take on more meaning. The more you see them, they take on the context of it. They bring all the I don't want to say baggage, but they bring the loaded scenarios where they were presented earlier into the end. So the moth, for example, was like a flickering moth guides the size to the necropolis. So that's clearly the ending. It's predicting the ending of a relationship, but it's like a silver moth. It's something like a silver screen. It's almost like a movie, right? Black and white movie. And then it's a bit dark. So there's some different emotions embedded in that. And then at the end, just sort of catch a silver moth on your sleeve, like it's sort of buzzing around you, it's moving around, and it becomes part of the tapestry of the environment.
And there's something about the being in love and how fantastic that is, and yet how the heartbreak is so bad. You can't have the highs without having the lows, and the other way around.
Exactly.
And there's also something in there about alcohol and about the way alcohol brings such pleasure, but it also brings such pain. One of the things that I've been fascinated by is the number of musicians who have been heavy drinkers who then go teetotal, and that there's a tension again between, you know, the greatness of love and the depths of it, and also with alcohol and you know, the fun you can have and how great it is to have a fabulous time, but then there's a fine line where it becomes
a hangover.
Yeah.
I love hangover.
Yeah.
Diana Ross. Yeah, the alcohol was interesting just because the person that I was involved with was a heavy drinker, and then, you know, the whole period, like us being together, and sort of was feeling like, you know, the feeling of sort of, it became symbolic too. So it's like the sense of being drunk on being in love with someone, you know, that feeling when you're so high because you know, you're so excited about a relationship, and you basically, they're all around you all the time. It's very, they get, you know, into your blood, so to speak. So there's something about being drunk on the love of somebody else, but then there's the irony that happens where he's more in love with the idea of being in love than the actual relationship. So he's kind of drunk on his own love, and then he becomes basically like narcissist looking at himself, you know, at the end of it becomes basically like a narcissistic meltdown for himself. And so that's kind of, the alcohol is a bit there too. There's the vodka, the clarity of the alcohol, crystal bound breath, the bottle of alcohol. His idea becomes like the bottle of alcohol that he keeps so close to him. His ideas about what the relationship is supposed to be versus the nuts and bolts of the day-to-day, you might say, right?
Yeah. This is one of those albums that you don't just put on and listen to. You know, let it wash over you. You have to kind of listen, because every time you play a different track, you hear something new.
That's great. Yeah, that was the point of it, particularly with the piece like the poetry recited piece, Furling Leaf, Retro Seed. Because that piece, the tension was created because the instruments were given symbolic roles, and then, you know, it's like a guided improvisation. So they were given metaphors, like the rhythm section was given the sound of basically the spinning of the laundromat, you know, and it also sounds like a train. And then I would tell people to do things in so where they would do that was a kind of a section where you would not expect it. So that created more of the tension. And then the piano and the electroacoustic clarinet are more expansive, and they're closer to light, and they have more of an impressionistic quality, like Ravel or something.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, is that it just depends, like because of the poetry, it has a lot of different layers of meaning, and then when you put it, then this what's happening musically becomes almost like another layer of metaphor, and there's dialogues that are going on. And then we created a Dolby Atmos mix of it too, so there's actually a lot going on with the Dolby Atmos mix. It's like called 3D music, so it's actually a film mix. So, you know, if you hear the Dolby Atmos, sometimes the voice is moving in circles. Sometimes, like, there's actually, literally, if you stand over there, you're going to have another experience than standing over there. And if you take in the poetry over there, it's going to be different than taking in the poetry over there. So it's almost like a 3D sound sculpture at that point.
Which goes back to what you said at the beginning about your perception of things isn't always, you know, there isn't always a truth, a single truth about anything. If you ask people about one event that everybody was at, they will all have an experience.
Like a COVID lockdown for a year.
Oh, yeah. Well, absolutely.
It's totally it. And so who knows what's going on inside the head of another person, honestly.
Right. When I was at university, I studied with a blind musician.
Oh, wow.
And I had loads of intense, deep conversations with her about the perception and the connections that you make to music that
Mhm.
are to do with fragrance and sight and color and other sounds, and just brilliant stuff.
That's really interesting. Yeah, like I guess people who are blind or they lose one sense, other things get sharpened. So yeah, it would be really fascinating to try to get in their world. I guess sounds must be extraordinarily vivid and alive.
Oh, brilliant. So talk to me about your lockdown. How has it been?
Well, it's been pretty boring. I mean, I'd say in the beginning I was pretty anxious and stressed out. There were times that I was actually sitting in my apartment and I felt like the walls are starting to get smaller. So there's a lot of claustrophobia. And I remember everyone saying, "Oh my gosh, is this going to go through to the fall? I can't imagine." And here we are, a year later, and I'm in Toronto right now, and Toronto just announced we're going into another hardcore lockdown starting tomorrow. So I'm happy to be launching this record now. I'm really glad that I've had a rock solid focus. I was nervous about, launching it over COVID because it's a challenging time in so many ways. But it's been really a relief to have it out there because it's been ready to go for 2 years. It was supposed to be launched last summer, but then when COVID hit, I just delayed it. And then it took a year to find the label that I wanted to be part of. I had about 8 offers. And so, it's been a lot of work, more than I expected. So it's been good to have this focus. Like I actually have a lot of writing projects that I'm supposed to be working on. I have grants for them. But it is a hard time to be creatively inspired. There's no question. It's okay for practicing. But I had a period where I was writing poetry and it was going great, but then I just sort of became less inspired. I think what happened was in the summertime, the weather was fantastic in Toronto. We had like the best summer that I can remember for weather, not much rain and just constantly like, I don't know, probably around 82 degrees or something all the time. And just gorgeous. So, life started feeling reasonably normal for a period there. You could actually go out and you could spend time with friends and then come back and then you have something to write about because you need stimulation, to be honest, to be creative. That's sort of a problem with COVID. There's not much stimulation.
Yeah. And I think we all miss the real interaction. I mean, it's great to be able to talk to you like this, but it's so much better to do it face to face, and that's just impossible at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, Zoom is better than at the beginning. I found Zoom super awkward, but now I'm finding it, a little more natural.
Well, I think we've just got used to it, haven't we?
Yeah.
I often get asked if I use the video.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say, no, I don't use the video. I just use the audio. But talking face to face like this is so much better than just doing it over the phone, for instance.
Yeah, I think there's more natural, spontaneous things that can happen. And they happen all the time in conversation in real life, for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So, as you say, Toronto is just going into another lockdown. Do you have plans? I mean, have you been able to think about touring and live work and that sort of thing?
Well, I've just kind of taken a be patient, day by day, week by week approach. I had a lot actually that I was supposed to be doing last year. I mean, I'm not the only one, but I was supposed to, launch this record in July, start a campaign in April, go to the Jazz Ahead conference in Germany, and then go to Berlin, do some networking there for future residencies and stuff like that. Because I'm interested in, kind of multimedia, being in an environment that promotes collaboration with different people. I'm already kind of moving in a bit of a multimedia direction with the poetry. It's already moving out of pure music for its own sake, that's for sure. Although sometimes I'm interested in that too, but so then I was supposed to go to New York in the summer and commute to Boston to have a residency with Rand Blake and Dominique Eade in Boston, go there for a couple of days a week. And there was just a lot of stuff to do. So all those, and I was supposed to be back in New York. Like I have a work visa. So I've been back and forth a lot since 2017. I was supposed to go back last winter, and then COVID happened, and that city was really dramatic.
Yeah,
especially then. So I don't really know. I mean, everything has just changed. Everything's just up in the air. I don't see that there's a lot of point in making solid plans right now. It's more just a question of, I know that I have to complete a couple of pretty major writing grants. And I have a couple of recording grants for them too. So it would be good to get those rolling. But it's been hard to think about something new fully when I have this album that was just not out yet. So now it's about, the campaign's happening, the reviews, all great interviews. And it's more like, how do I now move to the next project and try to clear my head? Because there's nothing in this room that is going to signal a change. I'm going to have to, clear the mental space some other way than sitting in this room. It just doesn't work. So go for a walk, do some writing, maybe by Lake Ontario when the weather's better. Just try to start something new, like the beginning of, just change the channel to a new project. It's very hard to do right now for everybody, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I started this podcast in June, and I think we all thought then it would be 6 months, that by Christmas, things would be better. And it's, here we are in April again. And there are still, France has gone back into lockdown. All the schools are shut, and it's just scary stuff that's going on for so long. And I think to try and be creative while all of that's going on in the underneath is it's supremely difficult. And I think the stuff that's coming out where people are being creative, albeit this was recorded a couple of years ago, nevertheless it feels like there is lots of stuff that is coming out that is creative, and that then leads other people, because there will be somebody who listens to your album who goes, oh, okay, that is interesting. I wonder if I could do something with my poetry, or it feels like there are hints of that creativity still going on, and we've just got to kind of focus in on them.
I think things are going to be different than they were before. They say life will never be the same. So we're not sure how and in what way. I mean, I think I'm a little freaked out about, the jazz gigs that I used to enjoy a lot and that were really fun and didn't have any prep work, even just the standards gigs that I, have been doing since 2010. And I had a lot of restaurant residencies and stuff that were just fun, and they just kept you performing every week and all that. I don't know what's going to happen there, because not only has the music business suffered, the venues have been suffering a lot too. So these restaurants, it's going to be, maybe it will be a good time to start up some fresh new ideas for sure. I mean, there's always like untapped opportunities. I say, you just have to think outside of the box. Yeah. So I'm open to thinking outside of the box. I'm not going to, beat my head against the wall and work towards things that just feel next to impossible. Like, it may be that things get more project oriented. Like, it's not like people perform less, but they do more like bigger production type things, like CD releases or going on tour in more substantial way through series. So I'm trying to be flexible and not lose energy in negative ways, and trying to be like pragmatic and realistic. I'm not going to invest in things that don't seem like they're going to give me back for my energy and my time. I've done that, sure. And I think musicians, there is a bit of a sense of self-sacrifice in all the arts and stuff, that somehow the more you sacrifice of yourself and get, and the more painful it is, the more payoff it'll be eventually. And it's not always true. So I think I'm just realizing that too.
Yeah.
So I'm just having a wait and see approach.
I think that's all any of us can do. I think as soon as you start trying to make plans, things
Yeah.
will be thrown up in the air anyways.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time.
absolutely. I appreciate your interest in the album and what's behind it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. It was very interesting talking to Lara about the album and everything that went into it. I began with an extract from Awe of the Sea, which is the second movement of The One and the Other, and I'm going to finish with a clip from The Embrace. Thank you for joining me once more on Harmonious World. Please do subscribe and leave a review and connect with me on social media. All of the links are in the show notes. Thanks for joining me once more.
Peters on I
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.